Hello and welcome to our last video of the Bible in the City. In this video we're going to look at the New Testament, how the city is portrayed in the New Testament. We're going to break this down into three sections. How the life of Jesus intersects with the city, how the book of Acts intersects with the city, and then how the book of Revelation interacts with the city. In our previous three videos, we talked about how the Old Testament and the city interact. Now we're going to shift to the New. Now, in the New Testament, we don't see as much of the residual idea of the evil city, except till we get to the book of Revelation, as we do in the Old Testament. The New Testament is much less harsh with the city, at least in my opinion. Let's look at the life of Jesus first. First of all, Jesus is born in a city. He's born in Bethlehem. I know we sing the song, "O Little Town of Bethlehem," but it wasn't that little, and it's not that little today. Bethlehem is a bustling city, and it was pretty busy back then too. Jesus grows up in a small city, Nazareth. Now today, Nazareth is a big city. I know that's difficult for a lot of us to imagine, but Nazareth has 150,000 people. It's no small city now. Jesus' early life is that of a carpenter working among people in the city, at least the city of Nazareth. His ministry is very city-oriented. We see Jesus doing things out in the country, like the Sermon on the Mount, but the Sermon on the Mount isn't far from a city. There were several cities around the Sea of Galilee. Capernaum was one of the chief cities. Magdala was another. Chorazin was another. Bethsaida was another. And we have all of these cities that surround, or at least they were small cities, that surrounded the Sea of Galilee. And Jesus spent a lot of time in them. He spent a lot of time in Capernaum. Didn't do a whole lot in Nazareth. But then we also see Jesus in Jerusalem. We see him in Jerusalem quite a bit. We see him preaching and teaching in the city. We see him fulfilling the prophecies of Zechariah, coming into the city on the colt of a donkey. We see him going to the temple and interacting in the city. We even see him as a 12-year-old boy, being about his father's business at the temple in the city. So very much of what Jesus did was urban. I know we've probably never stopped and thought of it in those terms, but once we read the Bible and see how much he did in the city, I think we can agree that very much of his ministry was geared toward urban life and urban reality. Well, you might say that's just the way they lived then. Well, that's true. That's the way we live now. And for every Sermon on the Mount, there's at least 2 or 3 times in the temple or messages in the synagogue. So Jesus came to the people. Where were the people? People were in the city. And that's a fact that ought not to be lost on us. Not only was he doing a lot of his ministry in the city, he was also crucified just outside the city, buried just outside the city, and then rose again just outside the city. And then he ascended on the Mount of Olives, which is just outside the city. So again, we have the connections of him and the city. And I think that is instructive to us as well. So once Jesus ascends at the beginning of the book of Acts, then we have the beginnings of the Christian faith. And the Christian faith in the book of Acts is a very urban faith. And it remains that way throughout the entire book of Acts. In Acts chapter 2, we have the day of Pentecost that occurs in the upper room in the city. Now, it's the day of Pentecost, so there were people in the city from all over the known world who were Jews who had come to devoutly worship. And so they heard the gospel in their own native language in the city because the Christian faith was born in the city. And the first few chapters of Acts concern the work of the Christian church in the city of Jerusalem. But then as we get deeper into the book of Acts, we see the gospel being spread into other cities like Antioch and Syria and Joppa, where Peter was dwelling in the house of Simon the tanner. We see Paul persecuting Christians in the city. He was on the road to Damascus, which was a city in which Christians were dwelling, in which they were up for persecution, when Jesus stops him, blinds him, and tells him to go into the city to a street named Straight, and there a man will help him. And then we see Paul on his missionary journeys. We see the spread of Christianity becoming an extremely urban idea. From the urban cities of Asia Minor, like Ephesus and Colossae and Derbe and Lystra and Iconium, to the urban centers of Greece, like Macedonia, the urban cities of Macedonia, like Philippi. That's right, it's pronounced Philippi. Berea, Thessalonica, then on into the cities down into Greece, the big cities like Athens and Corinth, and then on to Rome. We see that Christianity is very much an urban reality in the New Testament. The letters that Paul wrote, to whom did he write them? The Romans, the Corinthians, the Ephesians, the Thessalonians, the Philippians, all cities, all urban centers, all places where the gospel had been preached, where people are congregated. The city, the city, the city. Rome is a city, Corinth is a city, Ephesus is a city, Philippi is a city, Thessalonica is a city. All of these cities are places to which Paul wrote letters of instruction and exhortation and correction and teaching in order to help these cities, the people that live in these cities, to better live out their faith and to thrive there. Again, early Christianity is a very urban concept. It didn't grow up in the country. It didn't grow up in the pasture field. The pagans were, even the word pagan comes from the Latin word pagus, which means field. The pagans were the people of the field. They were the unlearned, the backward, the country folk. That's kind of hard for me to swallow, because I consider myself a very rural person. But at the same time, the Christian faith was a city faith from the very beginning, from the day of Pentecost in the upper room in Jerusalem, all the way through to Antioch and Joppa and the missionary journeys that went to Ephesus and Corinth and Athens and Rome. It's a very urban reality. And we will study next week at the history of the city from beyond biblical times. The Christian faith remained a very urban reality. Now, to finish up the New Testament, let's take a quick look at the cities in the book of Revelation. And the book of Revelation is dominated, at least the end of it, by two cities. Mystery Babylon and the New Jerusalem. Both cities. The first one evil, the second one good. The first one is the culmination of all that is anti-God and against God's plan. The second one is the culmination of all that is good and right and holy and just. So in the end, it comes down to two cities, Babylon the Great and the New Jerusalem, coming out of heaven as a bride adorned for her husband. And in the end, we all know that the good conquers the bad. And isn't it interesting that at the end, the New Jerusalem, as we said a few videos ago, the New Jerusalem has in it the tree of life, just as the Garden of Eden had. The New Jerusalem has flowing from the throne of God rivers that are rivers of life that flow out of it, just like the Garden of Eden had. And just like Jesus when he said, if any man would thirst, come unto me. And of the believers, that out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water. again, we have these images of the New Jerusalem being the recreation and the final culmination of what was started in a garden. I believe it was John Wartburg that said that the Bible is a story that begins in a garden and ends in a city. And I think he's right. And that this urban reality that we live in, that's part and parcel of who we are as Christians and as Western Americans in the 21st century, cannot be ignored. And that we have to find ways of being able to minister in this context that are specific to this context and that fit within this context. So these videos have been an introduction to how the Bible interacts with the city. We'll start up again soon on a series of how the city has evolved down through time. I hope you've learned a lot. I hope this has been interesting to you. Have a wonderful day. Thanks a lot. Bye.